we're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Wednesday, March 4th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Kyun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in. Also, Cheska's with you.
Happy Wednesday, everyone!
Happy Wednesday.
Yay.
Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're right in the middle of the work week, and to help shake off that midweek slump, let's talk about a major life goal shared by many millennials and Gen Z. For a lot of people, that goal is owning a home, a space to truly call their own. But with rising housing costs and changing lifestyles, that dream feels more challenging than ever. And I think many of us can relate to just how difficult it can be. So before we dive deeper into the bigger picture, let's start with something personal. So Kyun, do you have plans to buy a place of your own?
Of course I do. Like, who doesn't? I think
Right.
Do you not want a home?
everyone wants a home. I think it's everyone's dream to
Right.
actually own their own home. And, you know, ever since coming back to Korea from Australia, I've lived in Seoul, either through rent or jeonse. And as much as I wanted to actually own a house, even back then, housing prices seemed far from, I think, like affordable. It was like far from realistic. And this was like, what, 16 years ago. And also, like, for those who may not be familiar with jeonse, it's a uniquely Korean rental system where the tenant pays a certain amount to the landlord and leases a house for about 1 to 2 years maximum, and then receives the full amount once the contract has terminated. Now, as I have reached my 30s, unfortunately, I feel it's really important to actually, almost essential to have some sort of ownership of a house, especially as I plan the next stages of my life, whether it be marriage or even, you know, raising my own children.
And having a family.
And having a family.
Right.
And owning a house, actually, I think it gives you a sense of stability, comfort, obviously ownership and belonging. So for those who actually plan to get married or have kids, not owning a house really discourages you to take that next step in life. But I think, you know, living a life, you know, marriage and having kids is a big part of one's life. And for someone to feel very discouraged, not because they cannot afford a house, I think things need to change.
It does.
Moving forward.
It does feel really out of reach.
Right.
And as someone who still lives with her parents, it does feel really difficult. It's rough. What about you, Jessica?
Although, as someone who lives alone and is surviving the housing market, I do envy people who still live with their parents, very much so.
The kangaroo tribe.
Yes! And it actually ties in very closely with how steep the housing market is, because it is so difficult to own a home when you're in your 20s and 30s. And Kyun mentioned something about people wanting to start a family, but even those who are not planning on having a family, having a house equals stability. So for me, I too also live in rental, but I actually started looking for houses outside of Seoul because of the increasing housing prices. And actually I saw on the news that there are increasingly more people who are looking for housing outside of Seoul and trying to become digital nomads, so they can actually live in a place where they can actually afford the house and still have a pretty good lifestyle and still work in a job that they do want to.
I think that's like the reality, and people are thinking of different ideas to mitigate the situation.
Yes.
So we're going to talk more about this, but first, let's take a look at the screen. For many young people in Korea, the dream of owning a home feels more out of reach than ever. The number of people in their 20s and 30s who are not homeowners has now reached a record high, underscoring just how challenging it has become for younger generations to enter the housing market. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the biggest challenges people face when trying to buy a home, what the government is doing in response to the growing housing pressure, and the direction society needs to take to address Korea's deepening real estate crisis. As we just saw in the video, the gap between the dream of home ownership and reality is becoming increasingly clear, especially for younger generations trying to enter Seoul's housing market. So why are so many young people in Seoul still unable to buy their own homes, Kyun?
It's a very good question, and I think one simple way of putting it is a principle of supply and demand. When there is high demand and limited supply, housing costs just naturally go up, and it has continuously been on the rise over the past decades, not just in Seoul, but including this whole metropolitan area. And as much as I don't want to talk about this, just to show how many young people that is, are not able to purchase a house in Seoul, let's take a look at the screen. Now, this is according to the Korean Statistical Information Service under the Ministry of Data and Statistics. The graph shows the number of people under 40 residing in Seoul that pay either rent or jeonse. The number stood at almost 800,000 back in 2015, but in 2024 it reached almost 1 million, the highest number since statistics were collected from 2015. And another figure to point out is that 26% of people under 40 nationwide had ownership of a house, while those living in Seoul stood at only 18%. Again, highlighting the difficulty of catching up with the rising housing prices, and at the same time worsening the economic polarization.
Usually the numbers always take me off guard, but this time I'm not surprised. The three of us we all want homes. None of us are homeowners. It makes
We're
sense.
part of the 88%.
Yes.
We are.
No, 82%, sorry.
We are part of the statistic, basically.
Yeah, we're part of that don't own a home.
So these numbers really show how structural the problem has become. It's not just individual choice, but affordability itself that's creating barriers for young buyers. And beyond access to housing, the data suggests the wealth gap between generations is widening as well. So how big is the real estate gap between younger and older generations, Jessica?
Yeah, Susan, as you pointed out, the generation gap has actually widened to its largest since the record has begun. And the data shows that the 20s and 30s, people in the 20s, 30s, increased by just slightly less than 2% in owning average real estate assets. In contrast, those in the 40s saw an almost 10% increase during the same period. Now, analysts do point out that younger generations have struggled due to job market instability and declining income, making home ownership increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, older generations who have actually owned the asset have benefited increasingly from the increasing housing prices over the year. Now, in short, asset growth itself is widening the wealth divide between the generations as well.
Right. So while younger people are still struggling just to enter the market, older homeowners are seeing their assets grow much faster, which naturally widens inequality. But interesting, despite these challenges, buying activity among people in their 30s is still going up. So are more people in their 30s still actually trying to buy homes in Seoul? And how are they doing that?
Interestingly, that seems to be the case right now. And an analysis of first-time home buyers in this whole real estate market last year shows that buyers in their 30s accounted for almost half of total purchases. And this also marks the highest level recorded since statistics began in 2010. Now, although the government tightened general lending regulations last year of real estate loans, it did not impose stricter loan restrictions on first-time buyers, newlyweds, or special mortgage programs for households with newborns. And as a result of policy easing, I think many purchasers appear to have taken advantage of these opportunities for the newlyweds, the one with young kids, or people who plan to have kids as well.
Right. So this suggests that policy incentives and special loan programs may actually be shaping who is able to enter the market right now. At the same time, there also seems to be a strong psychological factor driving purchases among younger buyers. So what is this mindset that is pushing millennials to buy despite the risks that are there?
Yeah, and I think if you know the Korean culture, this might make a lot more sense because there are words on the street that the land in Gangnam is always going to go up. That was kind of the myth in the real estate. So even in their 30s, people still want to buy a home and people still want to own a home because they still believe the housing prices will keep going up. So that fear of being left behind is pushing some to, quote, buy at all costs. Now, they're stretching finances now rather than risking even higher prices later. But the data is showing a shift. Now, over 80% of recent apartment transactions in Seoul are for units priced under 1.5 billion won, mostly in the northern and outer districts. Now, in other words, many buyers have effectively given up on premium sales in the Gangnam district and are turning to relatively more affordable areas that are outside of Seoul. Yeah.
So I guess this comes from what you mentioned earlier about how, like, for older generation, they see their assets going up, their wealth going up. So
yes.
Younger generation are seeing their parents, their assets going up.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have been taught that way, but my parents actually taught me the value in real estate, and they told me it was the most stable investment that you can make because everything else was fluctuating so much. So I think with that myth, our generation definitely believe if we want something stable, the first thing to do is own a house.
Right.
But at the same time, like owning a house, it's really expensive, right? So you need seed money to start with. If you don't have that, you just feel completely discouraged to even go near real estate as an investment. Nowadays, that's why we're seeing a lot of people flock to the stock market.
Exactly.
Which is kind of easing the rising of housing prices, but I mean, it's still very high up there, so almost impossible for young people like us to actually purchase one.
Right, there's a long way to go. So rather than giving up entirely, many younger buyers are adjusting their expectations at times, moving away from prime districts like Gangnam and focusing on more affordable areas just to secure a foothold in the market. So we also wanted to hear directly from our viewers. So we ran a poll on the Arirang News YouTube channel asking, what is the biggest challenge when buying a home? So here's what the results showed. An overwhelming 78% pointed to high housing prices relative to income. Meanwhile, 14% said securing initial capital was the main hurdle, and 6% cited loan regulations. And only 2% were most concerned about the possibility of falling home prices. So all of this really tells us the issue isn't fear of the market cooling. It's simply that prices are too high compared to what people earn and can afford. And to get an insider's perspective on this, we're going to be joined by someone from overseas who has experienced a wide range of different housing types while living in Korea. That conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Alyssa from Germany, who has experienced a wide range of housing options since moving to Korea in 2022, including living in a Kusiwon, which are tiny and budget-friendly micro-housing units here in Korea. So hello, Alyssa. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
Right, so Alyssa, what is your current living situation? Do you have plans to buy a home either in Korea or back in your home country?
So I live in a one-room apartment right now under the Woolsey system. So it's the same system like in Germany, a deposit, monthly rent, and utilities. The only difference is the amount of the deposit. So in Germany, I paid a 2 months rent, and in Korea, I paid 7,300 euros when I came. But because the Korean won changed a lot, I think it would be more like 5,900 euros now. And if I plan to own a home, I think that's a very optimistic question, especially regarding the economy and the war right now. But in an optimistic future, I would like to move to the countryside again and have my own farm or like an animal sanctuary. But I'd need like a lot of land for that, so I think that's very optimistic.
Alyssa, how do Korea's apartment prices compare to Germany's?
I would say it's very similar. So we need to compare the different areas of Seoul to cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich. And then I think we are at the same price. However, on the countryside, I'd say Germany is cheaper. There's basically no infrastructure, but you can rent a big, but maybe a little bit rundown house in the countryside for the same price like an apartment in Hongdae or Itaewon. And I think in Germany, the bigger issue than the price of an apartment is in the city is the availability.
Alyssa, I have an interesting question. We talked about how Koreans view real estate. Which aspect do you relate to coming from Germany, and which part do you not understand when Koreans view real estate?
So in generally, I think what surprises me the most is that I still meet a lot of young women, Korean women, that still want to wait till marriage until they move out or move in with their partner. And in Germany, I feel like the process is a lot faster. People want to move in faster with their partner, and so they can afford to have an apartment or even buy quicker than Korean people because they want to wait or move to Seoul only to work. And I think that's a little bit of the difference because a lot of people live with their parents that own. And that's not so common in Germany. One thing that really shocked me is like a culture shock is it's not really 100% about real estate, but about that if people rent, they tend to move a lot. So my neighbors are changing all the time, and I've only lived here for 3 years. And in Germany, it was more like the opposite. So when I moved into an apartment, people would say like, "Oh, I've lived here for 20 years," but here it's more like, "Oh, I lived here for 2 months. I will move to a different house. I will move to a different house." And what took me the most is that people tend to leave the furniture at the house. So they are not taking it when they're moving, and even if they bought something new, they tend to throw it away. So when I'm walking my dog, I often see like premium trash, which is just like new furniture. And people are like, "It's cheaper to just leave it than to pay the moving company." I'm like, "Oh wow, this is very not German at all." I've never seen that in Germany.
That's really interesting how the cultural aspect plays such a big role, because in Korea, I think people tend to move a lot because so many people are living under the rental system as well. That's kind of interesting that in Germany, that's not as common. People don't move around a lot. It's pretty interesting.
But in Germany, I think we have one system where the rent stays the same if you stay in the house.
Oh, I see.
So it's cheaper in the long run, but it depends on where you live, what kind of rental system it is, because it can also like get gradually higher. But if you live there for 20 years, 100% it stays the same rent as 20 years ago.
I see. All right. Thank you so much for sharing your insight about the differences and the similarities.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke with a young person from Germany about her current living situation in Korea, how Korea's apartment boom compares to her home countries, and what she relates to or finds difficult to understand about young Koreans' housing mindset. Now, beyond individual experiences, the government has also been sending strong signals about tackling the real estate issue. So what message or policy has the government recently sent on housing?
So just a few weeks ago, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung delivered a very strong message on social media stating the Republic of Unearned Real Estate Income must be abolished. So in particular, the current administration has signaled that it will intensify pressure on multi-home owners, announcing that capital gains tax burdens will be significantly increased for properties sold after May 9 this year. So the government has made its stance very clear. If the property is not for personal residence, sell it. Otherwise, be prepared to bear heavy, very heavy taxes.
I think that's why even around me, there are people who are trying to find a house from like the ones that the multi-homeowners have, are trying to sell before May 9th.
Oh, right.
So I think there's like a rush starting as well.
Yeah.
And that's not helping the prices go down at all.
Exactly, because you also have to think about the housing prices are very steep, so there aren't many buyers who can actually afford the house.
That's
so it's
true.
not even about having more houses on the market. Are there people available like us in the 20s and 30s? If there is a house available, can we afford it? Not really at the moment.
You're making me feel even more discouraged now.
Harsh reality.
Moving on.
So this clearly signals a shift toward discouraging speculation and putting pressure on multiple home owners. And this tightening approach toward property ownership isn't unique to Korea. So how are other countries handling multi-home owners, Jessica?
Yes, the government has been tightening gaps on owning multiple houses, and it is seen quite globally as well. So in Singapore, tax rates are heavily differentiated based on the number of homes owned. Simply put, the more houses you own, the more tax burden you will have. Now, in the UK, buyers actually face pretty steep additional stamp duties when purchasing their second home. Meanwhile, France and the United States have strengthened property taxes to curb speculation and stabilize the market. Now, in short, many countries are actually using the tax policy as a key tool to cool off the heated housing market in some places.
So we're really seeing a broader global pattern, government stepping in more aggressively as housing affordability becomes a political and social issue, which naturally brings us to the bigger question about long-term direction. So what direction should society take on housing?
Well, living in a capitalist society, real estate is always going to be a source of investment, main asset driver. therefore causing more competition and rising speculation. However, when the younger portion of the population is living in a society where they cannot afford a house in an area they want to live in until they actually retire, I mean, it only brings negative results as they feel very discouraged and burdensome to actually plan big goals in life. For example, like I mentioned already, during today's episode, marriage and having kids. Now, low birth rate is a national problem here in Korea. We've mentioned it so many times on the show, and it needs to be tackled in the long run and the short run. But extremely high housing prices is one reason for delaying marriage for young people, or not even deciding to have kids, let alone not two. Just having a single child is like their ultimate goal because they already know how much it costs to raise a single child here in Korea because of education, private education, to be more specific. So we have all these social problems that arise. And it's not just about the rising house prices. There are so many different factors that we need to consider. But I think this is one of the main reasons why young people are very reluctant to actually take the next stages in life because you need a big space to start off with once you get married. I mean, if you live by yourself, it's fine. You can live in a small place. But if you get married and start having kids, wow, you need a bigger place to live. And can we afford that in Seoul? It's almost very slim. So I think things need to change. Otherwise, I guess if there's more infrastructure in the country area, more people feel encouraged to move down there. But for now, that does not seem like the case. Everything's all centered in Seoul, the Seoul metropolitan area. Therefore, the house prices are rising. So I think the government is doing a great job, and I hope this is like the starting point of more people feeling encouraged to actually own a home and raise a family.
I agree. What are your thoughts on this?
I absolutely agree with Kiwon, but on the actual investment side of the home, I would also like to suggest a different perspective, which I think it's not so much about the real estate being an investment. I think it's about the balance. Because for the longest time, I mean, you talked about our generation, right? A lot of families have built their asset and wealth through very smart real estate investment. The problem wasn't the real estate investment. I think it was that we didn't have enough guardrails. So when there is short-term speculation and people only investing for the speculation purpose, I think that can actually be a problem. So we should have more policies to actually protect first-time buyers, newly married, married couples or people wanting to have a family, but also have infrastructure that can take people outside of Seoul so that they can actually have a space and a more luxury lifestyle that are not so concentrated in the main metropolitan area. I think that could actually ease the overheated housing market, because even if the housing do come in the market, as we discussed just now, there aren't that many people who have the money and the asset ready to buy. So I think those are some of the things that should be considered.
So it's clear that the reality around home ownership is becoming increasingly complex. Governments may adjust policies, but the deeper question is what kind of housing culture society wants to build. Because in the end, a home should be more than investment. It should be a place to live. And also, Arirang TV is celebrating its 30th anniversary with a special global viewer event, My Arirang Story. So share your experience with Arirang TV and what it has meant to you through a photo or video. Submit your story by March 8th, 2026, and selected entries will receive BTS's 5th album, Arirang. So visit www.arirang.com for more details, and we can't wait to hear from you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Kyun.
Always a pleasure.
And also Cheska.
That's always mine. Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching, and may our dream homes arrive before prices climb any higher. We are
News Generation.